today. Dr. King asked me to provide a session on maintaining professionalism during feedback sessions. I think it's a good reminder for all of us. Our objectives today are to provide the tools to give feedback and how to act on feedback, both that we give and receive. So what makes feedback effective is a good place to start. And there's 6 points that we're going to expand on. We want to make sure that we share feedback frequently and in context, that our feedback aims to achieve a specific outcome, that we're realistic in our expectations from feedback sessions, that we express it as a point of view rather than as an absolute truth, this one's often forgotten, that we make it a two-way conversation, and that we assume an opportunity for follow-up. So we need to make sure that our feedback is shared frequently and in context. So the shared frequently is making a environment of feedback, and we've talked about this in other faculty development sessions as well. It's key to not only within the residency, within GME, and ideally within the organization itself to allow for free thought of feedback and encourage it for everybody. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But the second part, the context, is very important
Morning,
too.
everyone.
We want to make sure that our feedback is done as close to the incident as possible. The more important the feedback, the less we can wait until the 6-month review, the next CCC, or the end of year evaluation. If you can do it closer to the incident, you're more likely to change behavior in the future. Something we also don't consider is that we need to be ready to give the feedback. We can see a resident do something that was wrong, hear a resident say something that we didn't like, or any other behavior that you could think of, and it's very easy to want to give a snap decision at that point. The other thing is that somebody can tell you something that your resident did, and again, not within the context of where it happened or with all the details. And if you don't have all the facts and you snap to that judgment as well, it can blow up on you as well. You want to make sure that you keep that air of trust within the relationship between you and the learner. And if you act on this feedback inappropriately or too hastily, you can damage that that trust forever. The last thing we don't consider about as far as timing goes is that the recipient has to be ready to hear it. If it's too close, if it's immediately after the incident, if the nerves are still a little too frayed, if the resident isn't open to hear the feedback's going to be for naught. So we've talked before about the importance of labeling our feedback to make sure that our learners are aware that feedback is being given, because that's often where it's not realized that it is a feedback session that we're doing. But it's also important to make sure that we ask them if they're ready to get the feedback. If they're not ready to hear it, then don't let them off the hook. They can't indefinitely tell you, I just don't want to hear this, I don't want to deal with it. That would be inappropriate. But instead, make sure that you schedule a time that you both can sit down in an appropriate setting and have the appropriate feedback session. I love this quote. Everything that happens once can never happen again, but everything that happens twice surely will happen a third time. And this is very apt when it comes to feedback as well. If we have a resident that traditionally does well, or usually on the flip side of that, a resident that we're giving constant negative feedback to and corrective feedback to, we can see an action and think that's probably just a one-off. And that's probably the wrong way to think. In fact, it's definitely the wrong way to think. If we don't correct it the first time we see it, then a pattern is likely to happen within that resident's behavior. The time for feedback was after the first incident. When we allow it to happen 2, 3, 4, 5, infinite times before trying to correct it, the likelihood of being able to get an immediate correction is nil. And we may be trying to go into more corrective actions and action plans for these learners rather than if we had nipped it in the bud right away. So that timing is crucial. Feedback aims to achieve a specific outcome. Now, the first question you should ask yourself is feedback based on preference, or is it for the need of more effective behavior? If it's for preference, feedback probably isn't necessary. If it's for more effective behavior, it is obviously necessary. I'm reminded of a resident back in an old program of mine in Michigan who, no matter what the deadline was, she waited till the last moment to get it in. The flu shots, for whatever reason, were always a big deal up there. And in the carrot stick model, there were lots of sticks associated with not getting your flu shot. We'd have about a 3-week window to get our flu shots completed. And after about day 3, the reminder emails started coming out. This resident would always wait till the last day to get her flu shot. I asked her about it, and she said, "Why did they give me a deadline if I wasn't allowed to use it?" And I thought about it. It wasn't my preference. I would have preferred to get the flu shot early to make sure that I didn't have to get that slew of emails and the constant reminders. She didn't get the flu shot, so I also got the slew of emails and constant reminders. But ultimately, she was right. The letter of the law gave her a date to get it done by, and she always made her deadlines. There was no need for a feedback session at that point. And after she told me her thinking and her logic, I felt a lot more comfortable defending her and pointing out her historic data that she never was late. She always had things done on time. Administration didn't always like the answer to that response, but it was true, and she was aware that waiting till the last minute could account on her missing deadlines. But as far as she was concerned, she hadn't, and she wasn't looking to change her behavior. Um, Now, when the need is for more effective behavior, or there's something bad being done that we need to act on, this is the time that we should start developing a action plan for the resident. And when used with a feedback session, action plans are great for corrective action. Basically, there are 3 models you can use. You can offer that carrot or give a reward for the changed behavior. You can use a stick, which is more often what we do with corrective actions, in which case, if a resident doesn't change the behavior in the time frame that we set out, there's a punishment associated with it. And finally, we can seek alternative plans. Now, this is described a lot in the business world literature on feedback, not always as effective in residency training. But the one thing I can think of is if we start to see a change in behavior and the residents making the right step forward, perhaps a team reassignment could be done for the resident as sort of an alternative plan. Now, when we develop our action plan, there's some keys to make an effective action plan. One, we want to summarize the plan. So after you're done laying out the number of steps within the action plan, make sure that you sit down and you review everything that you've done. Then have the resident read back the plan to you. Now, I don't mean actually sitting down and reading the piece of paper, but instead giving a verbal feedback or a verbal readback. That they've heard what you've said and can effectively summarize what that is. This next step is important and often overlooked. Explicitly ask how they feel and listen to them. We can have ideas of what the best thing to do to remediate could be, but the resident may have some ideas that will alter the way we think about it. During this step, if we listen to what they feel about the action plan and it's reasonable, this is the time to make changes to your action plan to make it a win-win situation for the resident. And most important, you need to have a time frame for follow-up and completion. Just as the ACG&E won't allow us to dangle out remediation plans for the residents, we can't allow for effective action plans to dangle either. We need to have realistic timeframes for follow-up and for completion. And during those follow-up sessions, check with the resident, see how they're doing with the plan, see how they're progressing, and if they're doing well and starting to move the needle of the behavior, make sure to praise them for what they've done. Now, I'm not talking about flowery, empty praise, but instead demonstrate that you see that the change is happening, encourage that, and hopefully they'll continue along the way. One of the most important things is to keep realistic about your feedback and the plan to change. The old adage is Rome wasn't built in a day. Along the same way, we can't expect to do too much too fast with the residents. If it's something about behavior, professionalism and behavior, like being on time for rounds, that's something that can probably change the next day. And hopefully after a couple weeks of this becomes a new behavior for the resident. But if they scored in the bottom of their in-service exam, and you need them to get to the 50th percentile for next year, you can't expect all of that to change in a week or two. That's going to be a longer period of time in which they're going to be able to act on this feedback, to act on the action plan, and to show you that we're making some change. Now, when you follow up with them during these sessions and have additional feedback sessions, if they're not progressing in the way that you expect, you need to make sure that you're asking them why this is happening. One of the questions is, were you clear enough when you gave your feedback? If the expectation was that they were going to talk to the charge nurse at the beginning of pre-rounds and gather the data for overnight, and that they needed to be better in doing this, and that was your phrase, they need to be better, what does that mean? You may expect that to mean that the behavior is going to completely change in the resident. Better to them may be, well, if I do it 1 out of 7 days, that's better than 0 out of 7. If you aren't specific in your feedback and they're not making the change that they want, you have to make sure that when you reevaluate and you talk to them, that you clear up whatever wasn't there. Also, are you supporting the resident in this plan of change? They need to, when we're making especially larger behavioral changes or professional changes, you may need to bring in other members of GME, HR, other support systems for both you and the resident to achieve these expectations. If these weren't brought in initially, you may need to have another sit down and bring them in. And one of the things that we never want to think about, but have to keep in the back of the mind is if the behavior or lack thereof continues, and you set up another feedback session, you bring these people in as a witness and to support, and things aren't continuing the way that they should be, this is sometimes the time that we need to consider a point of termination or moving on. We've talked about the problem child resident in the past, but it always bears reminding during any of these discussions, make sure you document well throughout the whole process, so that you have support if our feedback sessions and escalations aren't working for the resident. You want to make sure that you express feedback as a point of view rather than as an absolute truth. Um, it is your perspective. Now, your perspective is one of a learned individual. You're placed in a position of authority, so it comes with weight. But make sure that you stick with professional language, you stick to the facts, and you keep things objective during your feedback. This is not the time to make personal statements or attacks towards the resident. Be unprofessional at any point with language, with verbal language, body language, and bringing in extraneous hearsay rather than true facts. As we said before, not only weakens the feedback, but also weakens your authority and with the resident. Now, one aspect of feedback that we don't always consider is that feedback is truly a two-way conversation. We really think, at least intuitively, and the way I got a lot of feedback during my residency was feedback was a soliloquy, and I listened actively, and the person providing it for me didn't need to listen because I wasn't saying anything. Modern day thought tells us that feedback really should be a two-way conversation. When we ask the resident to tell us how they feel or verbally respond to us, we need to be actively listening. We need to concentrate on the resident's message, its implications, and not really think about how we're going to respond to it. Once they're done talking, that's the time for response. When they're talking, it's the time to listen. In particular, listen to what the resident is describing, any images and metaphors they use. And if we don't understand something, this is our time to ask for clarification. While we're listening actively and looking at the resident, notice the nonverbal cues. Take note of the body language and the tone. Does the tone change? Does the tone and the facial expressions match? Do the body language appear tense or uncomfortable? Comment on what you see after they're done and see if that brings out any more conversation. One of the most important things is to monitor our own reaction. Remember, early on we said that we needed to concentrate on when, or work on our timing for when to give the feedback. But we need to, if we do our feedback at the right time, we still need to make sure that our reactions are appropriate. We sit back with crossed arms, tapping a pen on the desk, clearly conveys that we're not interested in what's going on or that we're angry. Sitting with open body language, ideally not with a desk in front of us, open to what the resident is saying, will provide much more of a meaningful two-way conversation. And finally, when we're done listening actively to what the patient or to what the resident says, paraphrase what the resident says and make sure that you understood what they were talking about. During this two-way conversation, we're going to receive feedback potentially as well. Make sure you receive it openly. You'll have an opportunity here to improve your relationship with the resident by showing how well you interact with them. You want to make sure that while you're listening carefully to the point of view, listen to what they want to make you walk away with. And if it gets heated and the criticism becomes about your behavior, even if it's probably a good point that they're making, you can point out that this is not the place for this conversation. Set aside that feedback session that the resident wants to give you and reschedule for another time, refocusing on the matter at hand with the resident. But again, through all of this, staying calm, staying professional, and not allowing our body language to become negative or aggressive. Now, there's three potentially difficult feedback situations. One is with the non-communicator. One is with the potentially volatile situation, and one is with the high performer. Some people are naturally unresponsive when confronted with feedback, even when it's positive. When you're talking to these people that are quiet or shy, you want to be very patient with them. If it's a negative conversation, don't rush the discussion. Don't try to force them to respond. You want to make sure that they get a chance to kind of gather their thoughts and articulate them. Don't let them off the hook when they say they have nothing to say, but instead coax them and guide them into the two-way discussion. The one we worry about are the volatile encounters, the hot-headed resident that we know is going to storm out, not listen, the ones that we dread. These also tend to be the ones that we allow to slip 2, 3, 4 infinite times before giving feedback because we don't want to deal with the potential situation that's going to happen. For these, you want to make sure that you write down what's your points prior to your feedback sessions. You want to make sure that you rehearse in your mind the outbursts that may occur, and plan to keep your feedback simple, limiting yourself to 1 or 2 primary points. Try to guide them into the discussion. If this is an event that they were involved with, ask them about the event in a innocuous way. Have them describe it. Often they'll bring up what happened and what this feedback session is about, and you can use that as a jump off point. And if they don't, that's the time to use your facts. Well, I heard from so and so that X, Y, and Z happened in the OR, and use that as your jump off point to talk. We can diffuse a lot of these potential volatile situations with certain people and keep ourselves professional and maintained. And then finally, the high performers can be a difficult feedback situation because they're doing well. But make sure that you encourage them during these sessions. Ask them what they're doing that's different. Some of our high performers actually are high performing at the expense of their wellness. And, we use this word a lot, but we want to make sure that they're not getting burnt out by maintaining this high performance. We want to make sure they still balance. And sometimes they can give us feedback on ways that they're doing things that can help us with some of our lower performers become a high performer. And finally, create that culture of feedback. Make your feedback a priority. Use it often. And the more positive feedback we give, especially when it's sincere positive feedback, really makes the negative feedback that we're going to have to provide during the residency training far more palatable and far more effective. If the residents see us as ones that are there to support and that feedback is not punitive, they're more apt to make the changes that we want to see. When good things happen, praise in public. Let others know how good that resident is doing in whatever domain. It doesn't have to be just because of a corrective action. It can be just something that they're doing well that you want to make sure that others are aware of. And finally, empower the team. Make sure that within this culture of feedback, everybody knows that feedback is expected and welcomed, provided that they follow the rules. They have to be courteous. They have to be they have to not keep it personal, and it must remain professional. And if the team is empowered with the rules and the ability to give feedback, feedback will flow more frequently, and residents will respond better. So in conclusion, we talked about sharing frequently and in context our feedback. We're going to aim to achieve a specific outcome, keep our expectations realistic, express our feedback as a point of view rather than an absolute truth, maintain a two-way conversation, assume an opportunity for follow-up, and if we maintain all of these, empower the team to do the same, we will foster a culture of feedback, not only within our individual residencies, but within all of GME. I thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about this.
Thank you, Dr. Beam. As always, a great discussion, great lecture. Is there any questions?